Imagine this. You're a German tank commander in 1944, deep in the chaos of battle. Your Panzer tank is powerful, heavily armored, and feared across Europe. But as the dust rises and shells explode around you, something strange keeps happening. No matter how many times you outgun the enemy, no matter how often your gunners hit their mark, the American Sherman tanks always seem to arrive at the right place, at the right time, like they can read your mind. The Germans, convinced of their mechanical superiority, never understood why the Sherman, lighter, weaker, and often ridiculed, could consistently outmaneuver them on the battlefield. What they didn't know was that the Sherman carried a secret weapon. Not a bigger gun, not thicker armor, but something far more powerful in the long run: radios. Every Sherman tank rolled into battle with a radio as standard equipment. A simple detail, easily overlooked, but in truth, it was one of the most advanced battlefield communication networks the world had ever seen. And it gave the Americans an invisible edge that German troops never truly grasped until it was too late. This is the untold story of how the humble radio inside the Sherman tank helped turn the tide of World War II. When World War II erupted, tanks became the kings of land warfare. The Germans introduced the world to the terrifying blitzkrieg, the lightning war, where fast-moving tanks and aircraft smashed through enemy lines before defenders could react. Panzer divisions tore across Poland, France, and into the Soviet Union, earning a reputation as unstoppable steel beasts. Against this backdrop, the American Sherman tank seemed almost laughable. Introduced in 1942, it was designed for mass production and reliability, not brute strength. Its armor was thinner than the German Tiger and Panther tanks. Its 75mm gun struggled against German heavy armor. In a one-on-one duel, the Sherman often came off worse. German soldiers mocked it, calling it the Ronson after the cigarette lighter, because once hit, it often went up in flames. Yet despite these flaws, the Sherman tank wasn't just a machine. It was part of a system built not around firepower alone, but around coordination, speed, and logistics. And at the heart of that system was communication. While the Germans invested their engineering genius in designing powerful tanks, they neglected something far more subtle: the ability of those tanks to talk to each other. From the very beginning, every American Sherman tank came equipped with a radio set, usually the SCR 508 or later models. This wasn't an optional upgrade. It wasn't something reserved for commanders. It was standard. That meant every Sherman tank crew could communicate not just with each other, but with other tanks, with infantry, with artillery, and even with aircraft. In the middle of the chaos of battle, American tank commanders could coordinate attacks, call for reinforcements, or adjust positions instantly. German tanks? That was a very different story. At the start of the war, only command tanks in German units had radios. Ordinary Panzer crews often relied on hand signals, flags, or even running messengers to pass orders. Imagine the chaos. Under fire, with shells bursting around you, a commander waving a colored flag out of the turret, trying to tell his unit to advance or retreat. Even as the war dragged on, radios were never as widespread in German tanks as they were in American ones. Resource shortages, production priorities, and the German obsession with technical superiority in armor and guns meant communication took a back seat. The result? German tank units were often tactically blind. They had superior armor and guns, but they couldn't coordinate as effectively. If a commander was knocked out, the unit could become paralyzed. If a battle shifted rapidly, it was harder for German forces to adapt. The Americans, by contrast, turned their Shermans into a swarm. Dozens of tanks could act as one, moving, flanking, and overwhelming their opponents. If one unit found a weak spot, radios spread the information instantly. If artillery was needed, a Sherman commander could call it in within minutes. This was modern warfare: fast, connected, and coordinated. And for German troops, it was almost like fighting a ghost. The impact of Sherman radios became most obvious in the Great Clashes of 1944. During the Normandy campaign, after D-Day, American forces faced deadly German Panthers and Tigers in the hedgerows of France. On paper, the Germans should have crushed the thinly armored Shermans. But battle after battle, the Americans pushed forward. Why? Because the Shermans could coordinate artillery and airstrikes in real time. A tank commander pinned down by a Tiger could call in Thunderbolt fighter bombers overhead within minutes. Infantry could relay coordinates to armor. Entire units moved like a single organism. In contrast, German tank units, despite their firepower, often fought in isolation. A Panther crew might dominate its sector until it suddenly found itself flanked by Shermans that had maneuvered unseen thanks to superior communication. At the Battle of Arracourt in September 1944, this difference was decisive. A smaller American force of Shermans, supported by good communication and air power, destroyed a much larger German Panzer force. Radios allowed American commanders to respond faster, reposition units, and bring every advantage of combined arms to bear. For German troops, it was baffling. They often assumed the Americans had some kind of uncanny intelligence about their positions. In reality, it was radios enabling rapid decision-making. The same story repeated across Europe. At the Battle of the Bulge, German armored spearheads crashed into Allied lines. Initially, they advanced, but soon American units stabilized the front. Why? Because American tanks and infantry could talk to each other seamlessly, while German units often became confused, misdirected, or cut off from higher command. This wasn't just about efficiency, it was about survival. In the brutal, fast-changing world of armored warfare, seconds could decide whether a crew lived or died. Radios gave the Americans those seconds. By 1945, the technological advantage of German tanks was undeniable, but it no longer mattered. The Allies had learned to fight smarter, not just harder. Captured German officers, after the war, often expressed disbelief at how well American forces could coordinate. Many assumed the Allies had far greater numbers than they actually did. In reality, it was radios multiplying the effectiveness of every Sherman tank. The Germans had built the perfect Predators, Panthers and Tigers, but they were hunters that often acted alone. The Americans had built a pack, and in the wild, the pack almost always wins. Historians looking back now recognize that the Sherman's greatest strength wasn't its armor or gun. It was its role in a network of communication. That invisible advantage helped offset its physical weaknesses and allowed Allied forces to eventually overwhelm the German war machine. Wars are often remembered for the biggest guns, the thickest armor, and the most powerful machines. But as the story of the Sherman tank shows, sometimes the most decisive weapon is one you can't even see. German troops never realized that inside each humble American tank sat a tool more powerful than steel: the ability to coordinate, to share information, to act together. In the end, radios turned the Sherman from an underdog into a battlefield equalizer. They turned scattered units into a unified force, and they taught a lesson that modern militaries never forgot. Technology isn't just about weapons, it's about connection. The German tanks may have looked like giants, but without radios, they fought like deaf giants in the dark. The Sherman, mocked as a lighter machine, proved that communication could be deadlier than the biggest gun. And that's how the Allies, with their inferior tanks, outmaneuvered one of the most formidable armies in history.